I find that technological breakthroughs are very intriguing, and especially interesting are ways to cut cost and improve quality. Today, it seems like we've almost entered into an era of science fiction, as we can now modify organisms via a plethora of methods. Transgenic modification involves taking genes from one species and inserting them into another that did not originally possess that gene. And it has raised many eyebrows from people. While we discuss this subject, though, let us remember to maintain a mindset that is scientific, one of skeptical open-mindedness. To delve into this subject, it would be prudent to discuss the history of GMOs, also some common GMO crops that are currently on the market, as well as to list some ethical aspects of GMOs. Okay, so first I wanted to give a little bit of the history of genetic modification, also known as genetic engineering, just so you're aware. In 1859, Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, and this actually contained extensive knowledge of breeding available at that time. And then you may have also heard of Gregor Mendel. In 1865, he published his research on the breeding of peas, like sugar snap peas. And then in 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick actually proposed the structure of DNA, which we know now as a double helix, kind of like a ladder that's twisted. The first transgenic animal was developed in 1980, which was a mouse. And then in 1985, the first transgenic pig was developed. Also in that year was the first transgenic plant, which had resistance to a specific insect. And then in 1995, Roundup-ready soybeans were produced. And this gave them a resistance to glyphosate, and glyphosate is the active ingredient in Roundup that we are aware of. Okay, so some common GMO food crops. One thing you do need to know is the United States is a lot more friendly to genetic modification being on the market than other countries. But in UK, for example, several GMO products have been approved. There's a cheese that has a genetically modified chymosin. There's also a soft ripening tomato, soya or soybeans, as well as maize or corn. There are many other GMO crops that, there are many other crops that have GMOs or just GMO ingredients in them. Research crops are also under research now that can produce vaccines, drugs, bioplastics, and various other substances. These products have been rigorously tested according to several scholarly sources, for one being Leeton Jones. So we know that several GMO food crops are cheese, soy, corn, but what about some of the ethical issues of genetic modification? By law, for one, GMOs are not required to be labeled. Some may understand this to protect the interest of commercial producers, though products sold are often found to have no more negative side effects than more conventionally produced products. Vermont, though, for example, is one of several states that actually has mandatory GMO labeling by law. The biotech industry claims that labeling is an undue burden as it raises the cost of production, but there are still people who do want certified non-GMO products that they're interested in. One of those would be the Non-GMO Project, and that is basically you apply, it's a third-party verifier, and they will confirm that your product has no GMO products whatsoever in it. In 2012, the Mailman Group did a poll, and actually 91% of Americans did want to know if their food contains GMO products. Another aspect of the ethical issues would be glyphosate. Glyphosate is a common herbicide, and actually the World Health Organization has declared it to be a carcinogen, which is a cancer-causing substance, and that's according to Scientific American. Glyphosate, as I've said, is the active ingredient in Roundup, and it's commonly sprayed through outgrowing and right before harvesting many GMO products. Crops that are genetically engineered to be resistant to this herbicide are deemed as Roundup ready. It's actually, glyphosate has made its way across our food supply, and there have been studies that shown that it's located throughout our environment, even in products such as feminine hygiene products, and that's according to global research. So we've discussed a brief history of genetic modification as well as common GMO food crops and also some ethical issues. It is important to remain vigilant and knowledgeable of new scientific breakthroughs, and while genetic engineering holds many promising potentials, to benefit mankind, we must remember to maintain the scientific mindset of skeptical open-mindedness. I admit that I was against GMOs and still have many hesitations regarding their implementation to the mass market, but let us begin a discussion based on reason and informed consent. So with knowledge of genetic history, common products, and ethical issues, we can make a truly informed and educated decision. What's in your food? And I did just want to show you guys, this is how you can identify how your food products are grown. So if it's conventionally grown, it'll start with it'll be a 4-digit code starting with a 3 or 4. If it's organic, it'll be 5 digits starting with a 9. And if it's a 5-digit code starting with an 8, that's one way you can identify it's genetically modified. And then this is a picture of the independent third-party verifier, the non-GMO project, and that's one way you can identify if a product does not